I still sell coffee on that same corner. People ask me sometimes why I never moved my cart, why I didn't take the better spot near the museum, the one that opened up 2 summers ago, the one with twice the foot traffic and half the wind. And I always give them the same answer. I shrug. I tell them I'm used to this corner. I tell them the regulars know where to find me. But that's not the real reason. The real reason is that something happened on this corner, and I don't think I could leave the place where it happened even if I wanted to. Some mornings I'm not even sure I'm selling coffee anymore. I think I'm just standing guard over a memory, the same way he stood guard over all of us. Let me start from the beginning, the proper beginning, the ordinary one, because that's the thing nobody tells you about days that change your life. They start out looking exactly like every other day. It was a Thursday in late September. I remember because Thursdays were always slow before lunch, and I'd been thinking about whether to pack up early and go home. The summer crowds had thinned out. The tour buses still came, but fewer of them, and the tourists who did come wore those thin jackets that meant they'd checked the weather and been lied to. London in late September will fool you. The sun comes out and you believe it. Then the wind comes down the road like it has somewhere to be, and you remember. My cart sits at the edge of things. Not right at the palace, not right in the park, but on that stretch where the two worlds touch. Behind me, the green. The wide, soft lawns of the park, the old trees, the paths where people walk dogs and push prams and pretend for an hour that they don't live in a city of 9 million. And in front of me, the road, the traffic, the black cabs and the red buses and the long, elegant fronts of buildings that have stood there longer than anyone alive. And down the way, past the trees, you could just see the rooftops near the palace, the flags. On a clear day, the light caught the gold on the gates, and you'd see it flash if you stood at the right angle. I'd stood at that angle 1,000 mornings. I knew that flash the way you know a friend's face. That Thursday, the light was doing exactly that. I had a small line, 3 people. An older couple, German I think, very polite, the husband counting coins into his palm with great seriousness. And behind them a young man in a suit that didn't fit him right, checking his phone every 4 seconds like the phone owed him money. I made the coffees. I made small talk. The German woman told me the milk was very nice and I said thank you, even though it's the same milk everyone uses, because a compliment is a compliment and you take them where you find them. I want you to understand how normal it was. I need you to feel how normal it was, because the people who weren't there always imagine it like a film. They imagine the music swelling, the slow build, the camera knowing something the people don't. It wasn't like that. There was no music. There was a man buying coffee and complaining the cup was too hot, and a pigeon walking sideways toward a dropped chip, and the smell of the park after a wet night, which is green and brown and a little sweet. Across the road, near the corner of the park where the formal path begins, there was a guard. Now, I should explain about him because he matters more than anyone in this story, more than me, more than the man in the suit, more than all of it. But here's the strange thing. At the start, he was just part of the furniture. You stop seeing them, the guards. If you work near here long enough, they become like the railings and the lamp posts. They stand so still that your eye slides right off them. The tourists stop. The tourists point and grin and hold up their phones and try to make the guards laugh, which never works, which is the whole point. But the rest of us, the ones who are there every day, we forget they're even men. We forget there's a person inside that stillness. A person with a name and a mother and a sore back, and a thought in his head that he isn't allowed to show on his face. This one had been at that spot for a couple of weeks. I'd noticed him only because he was tall, taller than the usual, and because once early on a small girl had dropped her ice cream right at his boots and started to cry, and I'd watched to see if he'd react. He didn't. Not a muscle. But I'd swear, and I've thought about this a lot since, I'd swear his eyes went down to that ice cream for half a second. Just a flick. Like he wanted to help. Like the part of him that was a man wanted to crouch down and say, "It's all right, love, we'll get you another." And then the part of him that was a soldier one, the way it always had to, and he went back to staring at nothing, at the middle distance, at the same patch of air he'd been staring at for hours. I gave the little girl a free hot chocolate that day. Her mum thanked me. The guard never knew. That's the kind of thing I noticed about him before any of it happened. Small things. The kind of things you only remember afterward when you're trying to put a person back together in your mind. So that's the scene. Late September, slow Thursday, thin sun, sharp wind. My coffee cart, the German couple, the nervous man in the suit, the pigeon and the chip. And across the road, a tall guard standing his post like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. It was about 11:15 when I first felt that something was off. I can't tell you why, that's the truth, and I've stopped apologizing for it. There was no announcement, no siren, no obvious wrong thing you could point at. But you work a corner long enough, you develop a sense for the rhythm of a place. The way the crowd moves, the way the cars flow, the mood of it, and the mood that morning had started to bend. It started with the cars. They'd slowed, not stopped, slowed. And there was a sound underneath the usual sound, a kind of murmur, the noise a crowd makes when it doesn't yet know it's a crowd. I looked up the road. There was something happening farther down, toward the busier junction, the one I couldn't quite see from my spot. People were turning their heads that way. A few had stopped walking altogether. The man in the suit noticed too. He lowered his phone. He looked up the road, then back at me, and he said, "I remember this exactly," he said. "Is there something going on?" And I said, "I don't know, mate, probably a film crew. They block the road for film crews." Because that was the reasonable thing to say. That was the thing my brain reached for, because my brain, like everyone's brain, wanted very badly for the answer to be ordinary. A film crew. A burst water main. A royal car, maybe, which would explain the slowing traffic, the turning heads. We get those. A black car with darkened glass sliding past, and for a few seconds everyone forgets their own lives and stares and wonders who's inside. I actually leaned to the side, trying to see past the trees, because some part of me had decided it was a royal car and I wanted a look. That's the thing I keep coming back to. In the last few minutes before it happened, I was craning my neck like a tourist, hopping to see something exciting. Be careful what you wish for. My grandmother used to say that. I never understood it until that morning. The crowd up the road got thicker. I could see it now, the way it was clotting, the way people on the pavement had stopped being individuals and become a mass, all facing the same way. And then I saw the first person move wrong. A woman, maybe 40, in a red coat with shopping bags. She came around the corner walking fast, too fast, the kind of walk that isn't quite a run because the person doing it hasn't yet given themselves permission to run. Her face was wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. Her face had the look of someone who has just seen a thing they cannot make sense of, and she was carrying that look toward us like she could outrun it. She passed my cart. She didn't look at me. The shopping bags banged against her legs and she didn't seem to feel it. And then there were more of them. It's a thing I'd never seen before and have only seen once since, and I hope to God I never see it again. The way a crowd turns. 1 second it's people, going about their business, slow and ordinary and bored. And the next second something passes through it, some invisible current, and every body in it is moving the same direction. And the sound changes from a murmur to something higher, something with an edge in it. I came around the front of my cart. I don't know why. I think I just wanted to be where I could see. The German couple were still standing there, holding their coffees, frozen, looking at me like I might know what to do. I didn't. I had no idea what to do. And across the road, I looked at the guard. He hadn't moved. That's what I noticed. In a world that had started to come apart, in a moment where everyone, every single person on that street, was turning and bracing and beginning to be afraid, he was the one fixed point. Tall and still in his red and black, staring straight ahead, his rifle held the way it's always held, his face under that great tall cap showing nothing at all. But here's what I'd missed. Here's what I only understood later when I'd had time to think. He wasn't staring at nothing. He never had been. All those mornings I'd thought he was looking at the middle distance, at an empty patch of air. He'd been looking at us, at the street, at the road and the park and the people. He'd been watching the whole time. The stillness wasn't absence. The stillness was attention, held so tight and so long that it looked like emptiness. And in that moment, while the rest of us were only beginning to understand that something was wrong, I think he already knew. I think he'd seen it coming before any of us. The way a sailor reads a change in the sea that a landsman can't even feel. Because as I watched him, his head turned. Just slightly, just an inch, toward the junction up the road, toward the thing the crowd was running from. And I saw his jaw move, the muscle in it, the smallest tightening, and his grip on the rifle shifted. And I realized with a cold drop in my stomach that the guard, the part of the furniture, the man I'd stopped seeing, was the only person on that whole street who wasn't surprised. He was ready. I didn't have time to wonder what he was ready for. Because that's when it happened. I've tried 100 times to describe the sound and I've never got it right. People always want to know about the sound. They lean in and they ask, what was it like? And I open my mouth and nothing I say is true enough. Because it wasn't really a sound. A sound is a thing your ears do. This was a thing your whole body did. It came up through the pavement and into my feet and through my chest and out the top of my head, all in less time than it takes to blink. A single enormous shove of the air, like the whole world had clapped its hands once and very hard. And then the glass. That's the part the films never get. After the bang, the silence, a strange flat ringing silence, and then into that silence the sound of glass. Not breaking, falling. A long bright shimmer of it coming down from somewhere up the road, 1,000 small bells all at once, beautiful if you didn't know what it was. And I stood there with my mouth open and a coffee cup somehow still in my hand, and I thought very clearly, in a calm little voice right in the middle of my own head. Oh, it's a bomb and I'm still alive. The German woman screamed. I think it was her. Someone screamed close to me, high and short, cut off. And then the street, which had been turning, broke completely. I won't pretend I was brave. I dropped the cup. I remember the splash of it, hot on my ankle, ridiculous, and I remember thinking even then how stupid it was to notice. People were running now, properly running, no permission needed anymore, and the running is a thing too. The running has its own danger because a panicking crowd is a kind of weather. It picks you up and moves you whether you want to go or not. Someone hit my cart and it rocked. A man went past me so close I felt the wind of him. A woman fell. I watched her fall and I watched 2 people go around her without stopping, and I am ashamed to say that for 1 second I thought about going around her too. I didn't. I want that on the record for whatever it's worth. I grabbed her arm and I hauled her up and she didn't even look at me, just pulled free and was gone into the crowd, and that was that. That was my act of heroism, the whole of it. 1 arm, 1 second. The guards was about to be a great deal more. When I looked back across the road, and I don't know what made me look with everything happening, but I looked, the smoke had started to roll down toward us. Pale and dirty, low along the ground, coming from up the road where the bang had been, and the crowd was pouring out of it like the smoke itself was made of people. And there, on the corner of the park, exactly where he'd been all morning, exactly where he'd been for 2 weeks, exactly where his orders said he should be, was the guard. Still standing. Everyone else was moving. The whole world was moving, was fleeing, was a single animal running for its life. And he stood. The smoke came toward him and he stood. The screaming washed over him and he stood. I could see his face now, clearer than I'd ever seen it, because he'd turned slightly toward the danger and his face wasn't blank anymore. It wasn't afraid either. I keep trying to find the word and the closest I can get is awake. His face was completely, terribly awake. Every bit of that stillness he'd been carrying for 2 weeks had become this. This readiness, this refusal to move, this one man planted in the ground while the ground itself seemed to be tearing apart. And here's the thing I need you to understand before I go any further, because it's the heart of all of it. He could have run. No one would have blamed him. There was a bomb. There might be another, that's what everyone fears, that's what we all knew without knowing, that the first one is sometimes just the bell that rings the crowd into the path of the second. He was a young man. He had a life. He had, I would learn, a fiancé and a flat in Croydon and a mother who'd already lost his father. He had every human reason in the world to turn and run with the rest of us, and not one person on that street would have thought less of him for it. He didn't run. I stood by my rocking cart in the spilled coffee, in the middle of the worst thing I'd ever seen, and I watched a man choose to stay. And I want to tell you what happened next, what he did, the thing that I will carry with me until the day I die, the thing that's the real reason I never moved my cart off this corner. But I'm going to need you to keep listening. Because before I tell you what the guard did, you have to understand who was still up that road, behind the smoke, where everyone was running from. You have to understand who couldn't run. There was a school group. I'd seen them earlier, maybe an hour before, and forgotten them the way you forget everything that doesn't matter yet. A line of small children in matching yellow caps, 2 by 2, holding hands, the way they teach them to. A teacher at the front and a teacher at the back and a couple of parents in between, herding, counting heads, the eternal job of anyone who takes children anywhere. They'd come down from one of the museums, I think, heading for the park, for a bit of lunch on the grass maybe, before the wind chased them back inside. When the bomb went off, they were up near the junction, near the worst of it. Not in it, I want to be clear, the blast itself hadn't reached them, they were past the corner, sheltered by the buildings, but near, close enough that the wall of running people was breaking right over them. And a line of small children in a crowd that has turned to panic is the most fragile thing you will ever see. The crowd doesn't mean to hurt them. The crowd isn't cruel. The crowd is just a flood, and the children are just small. I didn't know any of this in the moment. I'm telling it to you the way I learned it after, in pieces, from the teacher and from the police and from a woman who'd been close enough to see. In the moment, all I knew was the smoke and the screaming and my own animal need to be somewhere else. But the guard knew. Or no, I don't think he knew exactly. I don't think he could have seen the children through that smoke and that crowd. I think it was something simpler and harder than knowing. I think he understood, the way his training had built him to understand, that behind a fleeing crowd there are always the ones who can't keep up. The old, the hurt, the small. He didn't need to see them. He knew they were there because they are always there, and his whole self had been shaped, over years, around the single idea that his job was to stand between them and whatever was coming. So he moved. After all that stillness, 2 weeks of it, a morning of it, the whole blast and the falling glass and the breaking crowd, and he hadn't shifted a boot. When he finally moved, it was so sudden it frightened me almost as much as the bomb had. 1 second he was a statue. The next he was running, not away, into it. Into the smoke, against the crowd, against every screaming instinct that the rest of us were obeying. A tall figure in red and black driving up the road, toward the thing the whole world was running from. I lost him in the smoke almost at once. And God help me, I stayed by my cart. I'm not going to dress it up. I stood frozen, useless, my heart going like a hammer, watching the place in the smoke where he'd vanished. The crowd thinned around me as the last of the runners got past, and then there was a strange, awful lull. The first wave gone, the smoke drifting, a car alarm going somewhere, and under it a sound I'd never heard before and can't forget, the sound of a lot of people being hurt and afraid at once, up the road, muffled, terrible. I should tell you about the others because the guard wasn't the only one. He was the first, but he wasn't the only one. That's a thing I learned that day too, a thing I hold on to when the world seems dark, that when one person turns and runs toward the danger, it gives other people permission to do the same. Courage is contagious. I've seen it now with my own eyes and I believe it. A bus driver had stopped his bus and was out of it, waving people on, getting them moving, his big arms sweeping like he was conducting traffic, his voice carrying over everything. This way, keep moving, you're all right, keep moving. A young woman in running gear who'd just been jogging through the park dropped down beside the woman who'd fallen and stayed with her. A man in a chef's apron came out of a restaurant with a stack of clean white cloths in his arms, not even knowing yet what they were for, just knowing that white cloth was a thing that helped, and he was right, it was. And me, eventually me. What got me moving was a child crying. Not up the road, close, right close. There was a little boy 5, maybe 6, in one of those yellow caps standing in the middle of the pavement perhaps 30 feet from my cart, alone, absolutely alone in the gap between the crowd that had passed and the chaos still to come. He must have been swept off the end of the school line, carried along by the flood and then dropped, spat out, left behind, the way a flood leaves things behind. He stood there with his fists at his sides, and his face tipped up, and he was screaming for someone, a name, a mum or a teacher, screaming it over and over into a street that had no one left in it to hear. Except me. I want to tell you I thought about it. I didn't. There wasn't a thought in my head, my body just went. I came around the cart and I ran to him and I scooped him up. He was lighter than I expected. Children always are. And he grabbed my collar with both hands and held on so hard it hurt and screamed right into my ear. And I held him and I said the only thing I could think of, which was, "I've got you. I've got you. You're all right. I've got you." Over and over, the same nothing words, and they were the truest words I've ever said. And that's when I saw the guard come back out of the smoke. He had children with him. I don't know how he was carrying them all. I've thought about it and I can't make the count work, but I know what I saw. He had a small girl up on one arm, her face buried in his shoulder, and he had another by the hand. And there were 2 or 3 more clutching the back of his tunic, trailing him like ducklings, half running to keep up. And behind them came one of the teachers, the young one with 2 more children, and they were all moving together in this tight, desperate clump, out of the smoke, down the road, toward the open, toward the park, toward safety. He'd gone into the worst of it, and he'd found them, the ones who couldn't keep up, the ones the flood had nearly taken, and he was bringing them out. His cap was gone. I remember that. The great tall bearskin cap, the one that makes them look so unreal, so much more than men, it was gone, knocked off somewhere in the smoke, and without it he looked suddenly young. Just a young man, dark hair, soot on his face, a cut over one eye with a thin line of blood coming down. Just a young man carrying children out of a fire. And somehow he looked more like a soldier without the cap than he ever had with it. He didn't stop. He didn't look around for praise. There wasn't time and it wasn't in him. He drove that little clump of children straight down toward the park gates, toward the green, toward the trees, where the bus driver was waving and the woman in running gear was already opening her arms to take them. He handed them over. The girl on his arm wouldn't let go at first. She had a fistful of his tunic and she clung, and I saw him bend his head down to her and say something, just to her, his mouth close to her ear, and whatever it was, she let go. She let one of the parents take her, and he turned around. And he went back in. That's the part, if you remember nothing else, remember this. He went back in. The first time you could almost explain. Instinct, training, the body moving before the mind can argue. But the second time he'd already done his bit. He'd already been a hero. He'd carried children out of smoke and he was standing in the clean air with the danger behind him and every reason in the world to stay there. And he looked back at that smoke and I saw him take one breath, one deep breath, his chest rising, and he went back in. Because he knew there were more. I started moving toward the park gates with my boy still clinging to me. I had to get him to safety, get him to the others, and then, I'm not proud of the and then, but I'll tell you the truth, and then I was going to keep going. Out of it. Away. I'd done my one thing. The boy was my excuse and I was going to take it. I got him to the gates. I handed him to the teacher, the young one who'd come back for exactly this, who was taking the strays as fast as they arrived, and she took him and she looked at me with a face I'll never forget, white as paper, and she said, "Is that all of them? Is that all of them?" And I realized she was counting. She was standing in the middle of a bombing, counting children, and she was one short. and she knew she was one short, and the math of it was killing her in front of my eyes. "How many?" I said. "There's a boy," she said. Tom Whitfield. He's got a leg, a brace, he can't run. He was at the back with me and the crowd, and she couldn't finish it. She just looked at the smoke. And I looked at the smoke too. And I thought about my flat and my mum and the rest of my life that I very much wanted to have. And I thought about a boy named Tom Whitfield with a brace on his leg, somewhere up that road where I couldn't run away from. I'd love to tell you I went. I didn't go. I'm sorry, but I didn't. I stood at the gates and I looked at that smoke, and the fear had me by the throat and I could not make my legs move toward it. I have lived with that. It's not the worst thing about me, but it's not nothing. But I didn't have to go, because someone else already had. We saw him before we heard him. The smoke up the road shifted and a shape came through it, low, lurching, wrong, and for one cold second I thought it was a man hurt, a man crawling. And then it resolved the way things do, and it was the guard, on his feet, but bent. Bent over because he was carrying a boy on his back, a boy whose legs didn't work right. And the boy had his arms around the guard's neck and his face pressed into the back of the guard's collar. And the guard was running, somehow with all that weight, with his own legs going and the boy's legs hanging useless, running down the road toward us with his teeth bared and his ruined face streaming sweat and soot and blood. And behind him, out of the smoke he was leaving, came a second sound. Not the first sound, not the great clap of the first bomb. A smaller sound, a spit almost, a pop and a flat hard crack, and the air moved again, a second shove, smaller than the first but close, much closer, and I understood, we all understood in the same instant, that the thing everyone fears had just come true. There had been a second one, a second device, set as they always are to catch the helpers, to catch the ones who came back, to catch exactly the kind of man who would run into smoke to carry out a boy who couldn't walk. And it had gone off behind him. I saw the blast catch him. I saw it lift him. The whole front of that running man and the boy on his back, I saw them thrown forward, off their feet, the guard's legs going out from under him. And in the half-second of the air, I saw the only thing about that whole day that I will tell you with absolute certainty, because it was the clearest thing I have ever seen in my life, and I will swear to it until I'm in the ground. In the air, falling, with the blast behind him, the guard turned his body. He turned, on purpose. With his last bit of control in the half-second he had, he twisted himself in the air so that he would land underneath, so that the boy would land on him, so that his body, his back, his bones, would be the thing between Tom Whitfield and the ground. And then they hit the pavement, and the smoke rolled over both of them, and I couldn't see any more. There's a thing that happens to time when you're watching for someone to be alive. It stretches. Every second gets long and thin and unbearable. I stood at the park gates with the smoke between me and the place where the guard and the boy had gone down, and I don't know how long it was. People say it was 30 seconds before anyone moved toward them. The teacher says it was less. To me, it felt like the rest of my life, and I lived all of it standing still, useless again, my hands open at my sides, waiting for the smoke to give them back. The bus driver went first. He'd been waving people to safety this whole time, the big man, and when the second one went off he ducked behind his bus like the rest of us, but he came up out of that crouch and he didn't even slow down. He just ran straight at the smoke, this great barrel of a man, shouting, not words now, just sound, just a roar, the kind of noise that comes out of a person when they've decided to do a hard thing and they need the noise to carry them through it. And the noise broke the spell. Because the chef in the apron went after him, and the young woman in the running gear, and then, and I'll never fully forgive myself for how long it took, but I went too. Finally, my legs found themselves and I went. We came into the smoke, and it was like walking into a held breath. Quiet all of a sudden. The screaming was behind us now, down by the gates. Up here it was just the drifting gray and the smell of it, burnt, chemical, wrong, and the crunch of glass and grit under our shoes, and somewhere a phone ringing and ringing in a pocket nobody would ever answer. And then we found them. They were in the road. The guard was on his back. The boy, Tom, was on top of him, exactly where he'd been put, exactly where the man had turned his own body in the air to keep him. And Tom was crying loud, a good loud healthy frightened cry. And I have never in my life been so glad to hear a child cry, because a child who can cry like that is a child who is going to be all right. The bus driver got the boy, lifted him off, gentle as anything, those huge arms suddenly so careful, and Tom screamed for the guard, would not let go of the guard's collar, and we had to work his small fingers loose one at a time. The brace on his leg was bent, but his leg under it wasn't, and apart from a scrape down one arm in the terror, he was whole. He was whole because a man he'd never met had decided, in the half-second of a falling, that he wouldn't be the one to land hardest. The guard didn't move. I want to be careful here. I want to tell this part true because it's the part people most want me to make into something it wasn't, and I won't do that to him. People want me to say his eyes opened. They want a moment, a line, a last brave word. There wasn't one. When we got to him, his eyes were closed and his face was gray under the soot, and there was a stillness on him that was different from the stillness he'd worn all morning, a heavier one, a frightening one, and for a few seconds, kneeling next to him in the road, I was sure. I was certain. I thought, he's gone, he gave it all and he's gone, and something in my chest just dropped away into nothing. The woman in the running gear shoved me aside. Not unkindly, fast. She knew what she was doing. She had her fingers at his throat and her ear down by his mouth, and she was very still herself for 1 second too, and the whole world hung on her face, on what she'd find. "He's here," she said. "He's here, he's breathing. Get them, somebody get them." And then it was hands and shouting and the chef's white cloths put to their proper use and the bus driver bellowing for the paramedics who were already coming now, the sirens close, the blue light strobing through the smoke, and I got pushed back out of the way, which is where I belonged. I'm not a doctor. I sell coffee. I'd done the one thing a person like me can do, which is to be there and to not look away and to carry the truth of it out so it could be told. That was my job. I held on to it. They took him out on a stretcher. Both of them, Tom on one, the guard on another, side by side for a moment as they were carried down toward the ambulances. And the strangest thing happened. The kind of thing you'd never believe in a film. The boy reached out. From his stretcher, this little hurt boy reached his hand across the gap toward the unconscious man who'd shielded him, and one of the paramedics, without breaking stride, just moved the 2 stretchers a touch closer so the boy could reach. And Tom got 2 fingers onto the guard's sleeve and held on. And they carried them down to the road like that, the boy holding the man's sleeve, and I had to turn away because I couldn't watch it and stand up at the same time. His name was Daniel. I learned that later. Daniel. I won't give his full name or his regiment or the rest of it because the family asked that the fuss be kept small, and they've earned the right to ask for anything they want for the rest of their lives. But his name was Daniel, and he was 26, and he was from a town up north that I'd never heard of, and he'd wanted to be a soldier since he was younger than Tom Whitfield. His mum told a reporter that. She said he'd march around the garden as a little boy with a stick on his shoulder for a rifle. She said when she got the call, the first thing she felt, before the fear even, before anything, was that of course it was him. Of course it was her Daniel who'd gone back in. She said she'd have been more surprised to hear that he'd run. He lived. I'll say it plainly because I made you wait and that's not fair. He lived. It was bad, it was very bad, and it was a long road, months of it, things rebuilt that don't rebuild easy, but he lived. The back that he'd turned to take the blast and the fall, that back carried him through it, the way it had carried Tom out of the smoke. There was a time it was touch and go, and a city held its breath for a young man most of it had never heard of, and then he came through, and the relief of it went through the whole country like weather. 11 people were hurt that day, some of them badly. By every account it should have been far, far worse, the second device especially, set where it was set, timed the way it was timed, designed to do the most harm to the most people. The people who study these things said afterward that the casualties were a fraction of what they should have been, and when they were asked why, They talked about the quick clearing of the area, the fast response, the crowd moving the right way at the right time. But those of us who were there know it wasn't a thing. It was people. It was a bus driver and a chef and a woman out for a run and a teacher counting heads in the middle of hell. And before all of them, setting the pattern they all followed, planting the first flag, it was a guard who didn't move when he should have been terrified, and then moved when everyone else was frozen, and then went back, and back again, into smoke, into a second blast, and turned his own body in the air for a boy he'd never met. Nobody died that day near Hyde Park. 11 hurt and not one killed in a thing built to kill. I've heard people call it a miracle. I understand why they say it. But I was there and I'll tell you it wasn't a miracle. A miracle is something that happens to you. This was something people did. It's been a few years now. The road healed fast the way cities do. New glass went into the windows within the week. The scorch marks came up off the pavement. If you walked that stretch today, a stranger, a tourist with a thin jacket and a hopeful face, you'd never know. You'd buy a coffee off the funny old bloke at the cart on the corner and you'd walk down toward the palace to see the flags and the gold, and you'd never feel the weight of what that ground had held. And that's right. That's how it should be. The whole point of what those people did that day was so that the days after could be ordinary again. So that children in yellow caps could walk 2 by 2 down a safe street to eat lunch on the grass. I went to see him once, Daniel, a long while after when he was mending. Tom Whitfield's mum arranged it. She and I had stayed in touch, the way you do with someone you stood next to in the worst hour of your life. We went together, her and Tom and me, and Tom brought a drawing he'd done, a drawing of a tall guard with a great big cap, far too big, taking up half the page, and standing next to the guard a small stick-figure boy, and over the top in a child's careful letters it said "Thank you for catching me." Daniel looked at it for a long time, and then he said the only thing I ever heard him say about any of it, the only thing, and I've kept it like you keep a stone in your pocket, turning it over with your thumb when the world is hard. He said, "That's the job. That's all, that's the job." Like it was nothing, like any man would have done it. He honestly seemed to believe that he'd done a perfectly ordinary thing, the thing he'd signed up to do, the thing standing there in the cold for hours every day was always secretly for. All that stillness, all those mornings I'd thought he was staring at nothing. It had only ever been the in-breath before that one out-breath. He'd been getting ready his whole life for a Thursday in September, and when it came, he'd simply done what he was ready to do, and he couldn't understand why anyone thought it was worth a drawing. I think that's the thing I most needed you to understand about him. Not the bravery, you'd have worked out the bravery on your own, but the ordinariness of it to him. The way he'd folded something enormous into something small and slipped it into his day like loose change. We make heroes into statues. We put them up on plinths and make them more than men, the way that great tall cap makes the guards more than men. And the truth is the opposite. The truth is they're exactly men. That's what makes it mean anything. A statue can't be afraid. A statue can't have a flat in Croydon and a mum up north and a whole sweet life it wants to keep living. Only a man can have all that and feel the fear of losing it and go back into the smoke anyway. Tom Whitfield is taller than his mum now. He plays football, brace and all, plays it well by what she tells me. He's going to be all right, that boy. He's going to have the whole long life that someone bought for him with a turned body and a broken back, and most days he won't even think about it, and that's the gift. That's the actual gift. Not to be remembered every day. To be free not to. I still sell coffee on that corner. I told you that at the start, and now you know why. The better spot opened up by the museum and I let it go, and I've never once regretted it. Because some mornings when the light is right, the sun catches the gold on the gates down by the palace and throws a flash up the road, the same flash I've known for 30 years, and I look up from the milk in the cups, and across the road there's a guard standing his post. A different man, of course. They rotate, they change. I've seen 100 of them come and go. Tall and still in the red and the black, staring out at what looks like nothing. But I know better now. I know he's not staring at nothing. I know that stillness isn't empty. I know there's a man in there, a whole man with a name and a mum and a life he wants to keep, holding himself ready for a thing he hopes will never come. And I lift my cup to him every time, just a small lift just for me. He never sees it. He's not allowed to see it. That's the job. And I go back to making coffee on the corner where I learned the truest thing I know, that the bravest people you'll ever meet are the ones who look, right up until the last second, exactly like they're doing nothing at all.